Welcome to 5-Minute Chemistry. In today's episode, we are going to talk about what chemistry is, and I will introduce the very basics of Dalton's atomic theory, which gave the underpinning of modern chemistry. So what is chemistry? Well, chemistry is one of the natural sciences. These are sciences that are trying to understand processes going on in the natural world. And while nature itself has no obligation to fit into neat categories, we humans have limited intellects and limited brain capacities, so we make up these categories for us to make it easier to understand the world. And chemistry is trying to understand how materials change into one another, how material properties are influenced by the composition of these materials, and what are the interaction between these materials, how they change into one another, etc. And of course, there are some areas in chemistry which are closely related to biology, like biochemistry, and then we also have physical chemistry and we also have chemical physics, where kind of the distinction between these different branches of natural sciences get blurry, because just as I said, nature has no obligation to fit into our neat categories, so we need to have our categories to be flexible enough so we can fit in the natural processes. So in our modern understanding, basically chemistry boils down to studying bonds between atoms. So physics gave us a very good understanding of what atoms are, how they work, how they interact with each other, and chemistry can, based on these models, study how these atoms bond with each other to form microscopic materials, to form different materials, different type of objects, and we can study how these bonds break and new bonds are formed, which basically are just movement of electrons. So chemical bonds are all based on the electrons, and so we basically, when we study chemistry, we study how the electrons are rearranged between atoms. At least this is the modern understanding of chemistry. The word chemistry itself is coming from the word alchemy. So alchemy was we would call it a pseudoscience by today's standards, but the goals of alchemy were kind of similar to chemistry. Well, alchemy, they really wanted to transfer materials from one another, which is kind of what chemical engineers are trying to do. But the main goal of alchemy was to create gold, to modify other metals until they become gold. And because these people didn't just want to get rich, they also wanted to enjoy these riches forever. They are also looking for the elixir of life to live forever. And in a lot of European languages, we can see that the words for alchemy and the word for chemistry are very similar. Well, the alchemy itself, it's coming from Arabic, which you can guess that it starts with al. Interestingly, alcohol is also coming from the Arabic, but the chemi part is kind of unclear where it is coming from. But in German, for example, alchemy is alchemy and chemistry is chemi. In Hungarian, it's alchemia and chemia. In Polish, it's alchemia and chemia. So you can see that this is basically the science inherited the name of the pseudoscience it grew out of. I really like how Asian languages form the word chemistry. So in Chinese, because Chinese uses characters that confer the meaning of the words. So even though the pronunciations change over time, we can just still look back at the characters themselves and deduce what is the root of the word, what is the etymology of the word. And so chemistry is the study of change. So the first character will mean change, and the second character means study. So it comes to the same or very similar words, the same origin words in Korean and Japanese also. And this is very fitting to chemistry because indeed chemistry is trying to unveil how material properties change and how one material changes into another. Okay, so in the end, we will just go into the very basic concepts of the atomic theory. So atomic theory can be traced back to the idea of an ancient Greek philosopher called Democritus, who came up with this idea that matter cannot be divided infinitely. The story goes that he was on a hill and looking over to the other hill when another guy was herding sheep, and the sheep, he couldn't see with his own eyes the sheep one by one. He could just see this huge white cloud of sheep moving on the hillside. And he came to the idea that maybe other things that we perceive as continuous, like the water flowing down in a river or the ground or rocks, they are also not really continuous, but if we would start to divide them into smaller and smaller pieces, we would arrive at a smallest particle which cannot be further divided. So, of course, Dalton took this idea and kind of fit it to his experimental results, and this is how he figured out that actually, yes, chemical compounds and the chemicals in general are made of these kind of atoms. And chemists knew that matter is made up of particles based on their experimental results much earlier than physicists. Physicists did not accept this for another 50 years, or at least they debated this quite openly, while chemists just accepted this theory because it's really well described how materials change into each other. And of course, Dalton also deduced from his experiments that not all atoms are the same, so multiple types of atoms exist, and to understand chemistry we need to know what material is made up of what types of atoms, because the properties of materials are determined by what type of atoms the specific material is made up of. Okay, so this is for today's episode, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.